Okay. We will be starting the live stream soon.
life.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our live stream today. Make sure you guys are putting your comments below so that we can answer them later in the program. I'm here today with Ron Meinhardt. He is an RN and he has a BSN, and he's here today to talk to us about health, things to do with health, things to do with medical missionary work. So, Ron, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself for those who might not know who you are.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm a devoted follower of Jesus Christ. He is my Savior, my Redeemer, and my friend. And that's the reason why I'm here today. I feel very blessed to be able to sit down with you and to talk a little bit about the subject of medical missionary work and also about prevention and wellness, which is a great desire of mine to spread this wealth of knowledge that we have. I am a father of 6, and my lovely wife and children are back in Oklahoma, back home. And we have traveled extensively, so maybe some of your viewers have seen us in a church or a community center in their area. And not so much during COVID, of course. The evangelism world was kind of turned upside down during that time. But prior to that, we were traveling extensively, and as I was telling you before, dealing with topics that were very pertinent to that coming pandemic.
Yes. So you mentioned to me earlier that you had been traveling around for about 8 years.
Yes.
Basically, almost non-stop traveling.
Exactly. Yeah, about 2013 was when the Ebola scare happened out of sub-Saharan Africa. And around that time, I was living in Idaho with my family. Of course, we didn't have 6 children at that time. We've grown since then. But I realized that our public health infrastructure and our public outreach in terms of prevention and wellness was not adequate during that time, leading up to that time. And especially when the pandemic hit and there was a possibility of it coming here, the Ebola virus, which had a very high fatality rate. I believe it was 40% in sub-Saharan Africa. So I thought, well, now's the time to do something. If no one else is doing it, then I'm going to do it. And we put together little YouTube videos. My whole family got involved and actually put a online program, training program on for prevention and wellness. We called it Pre-Bola. And that was the start of us really going out and doing more public or population-based public health. And it has been a delight of mine to be able to take part in that over the years. Now, during that time, our primary message was, hey, Matthew tells us that pandemics and pestilences are coming. And Jesus' admonition is to go out and to do as I've done. Matthew 9:35 tells us that he went about all the cities and villages teaching and preaching and healing in the synagogues, addressing the spiritual needs of man.
Right.
And if we break that down, we can compartmentalize Christ's ministry into 3 very distinct aspects of ministering to the mental, the physical, and the spiritual. And so that's what we were doing for about 7 years and really helping people to recognize that, yes, pestilences are coming, viral pandemics are coming, but we can be ready, and first of all, we can be right with Christ. And so our very last seminar series was closed down with thankfully not the Ebola, but the COVID pandemic, when all the lockdowns occurred. And I can remember the very last presentation that I gave, right before everything was locked down. It was such a relief. I kind of walked away and just kind of wiped my brow and said, Lord, I hope I've been faithful because you've told us these times are coming. But it's my belief that all of us are called to this. All of us are called to be exemplars of Christ's ministry. And so what that means is that we do teach, that we do preach, but we also do heal, and we use his methodology as well.
So you were talking about these 3 aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Could you go a little bit more into that and how that is defining, because you mentioned that that's basically what medical missionary work is.
Yes.
And just a little more detail on those 3 aspects.
Definitely. Well, we can look at the ministry of Christ, the healing ministry of Christ, and we can realize that Christ did not only minister to the physical needs of individuals. When people came to him, yes, their physical disability, their illness would bring them to a recognition of their need and bring them to the Savior. But they had not quite established that this is the one who will save me from my sins. This is what we need to bring people to, is the knowledge not only that there's healing in the world, and the healing is from Christ, true healing, but also there's physical and there's spiritual restoration as well. And if you look at Christ's question to many of those who are afflicted with disease, it wasn't, oh, you want me to heal your arm? Okay, I'll do it. No, it was, will thou be made whole? And will that be made whole? That encompasses the whole being. And who are we? We're mental, physical, and spiritual beings, or capable of, we're not ethereal spiritual beings, don't want to be misunderstood, but our characters can be worked upon by divine influences and by evil influences. So we have a capacity to grow spiritually.
Could you go into the will thou be made whole part of that?
Mm-hmm.
And why it wasn't just him seeing someone and him just doing the deed, or them maybe, seeking for help somewhere and he would do it. He always prefaced it. It seems there was a preface before he would do things.
Definitely. And he oftentimes asked individual or admonished individuals, go and sin no more. That was often part of it. He recognized when individuals had contributed to their illness by their own course of action. Now, not every illness is because of choices. That some of it is carried on and carried out genetically speaking. But every illness can be positively affected by making good choices, whether it be a lessening of the severity or even in some cases a reversal. But Christ did not simply focus on the physical, because those people still died, that he healed. And he had eternity in view. See, when Christ looks at our problem, we whine and complain. And I'll be the first to admit that when troubles come and when we're afflicted. But with eternity in view, Christ says, this is only for a moment, but I want you for eternity. Will thou be made whole? And he brings us to a greater realization of our need. It's not simply, oh, I need a mended arm because it's broken. No, it's that I need a mended heart. I need a character after the divine similitude, And that's that, the term is thrown out today, holism, or holistic. It's really a misnomer. If we want to be whole, we come to Christ. That's the only way we can be made whole.
I think you brought out a good point about go and sin no more, because especially when we're talking in the health realm, there's a phrase, the curse causeless shall not come.
Yes.
So whatever ailment we're having has a cause somewhere along the line, whether, like you said, maybe you did it or maybe you didn't do it.
Exactly.
But there's some outside force applying that. Maybe you were exposed to some chemicals. Maybe when your mother was pregnant, maybe there were certain things happening there. But all of that does have an effect, which is why I think you're so passionate and we're so passionate at Amazing Discoveries talking about health, because people need to realize all the things they do has a long-lasting effect, whether it's on them or their children.
Exactly. We pass on. Our legacy is more than just an inheritance, a monetary inheritance that we leave, or a name. Our legacy is it's built into our genetics, our very DNA. We pass on traits, we pass on propensities. And the field of epigenetics is kind of an interesting thing. We don't touch on that during the children's program, kind of a complex issue. But the field of epigenetics reveals that even bad genes can be corrected, and those corrections can be passed on to offspring. And we know that the sins of the fathers are passed down to the third and the fourth generation. All that is scientifically validated now in this the field of genetics. So Christ wants us to be able to, by His grace, and by all means, we can't make even healthy decisions on our own. because it's always going to be about self. If it's just me making the decision, there's some selfishness in that. It's not making me whole. When we come to Christ and we say, Lord, not what I will, but let thy will be done, he can make us whole when we surrender all. He cannot make us whole if we only surrender 99%, by the way,
Right.
because that's still a tainted offering. He wants all of us, not because he's selfish, but because he loves us, because he knows we need to let go of selfishness. And that's what being made whole is all about. And that can be passed down from generation to generation, propensities to certain types of behaviors even, outbursts of anger and wrath. All those we know scientifically can be passed on now. And so we're talking in this series about children, and we call it preventive parenting. And
The series that Ron is mentioning, because maybe not everybody knows about it, is our Children's Health Summit coming out in July.
yes,
So Ron's been here, and we've been filming for the Children's Health Summit. So make sure, if you have children or know people who have children or just want to know about health in general, make sure you go to Amazing Discoveries and sign up for that health summit.
yes, definitely.
So yes, and as you were saying, one thing I wanted to touch on that you mentioned was epigenetics, because I think that plays into the question, well, I was born, with this predisposition, and there has been studies that show, you can see similarities from your parents in you, right?
Oh, yes.
The way you speak, even phrases. There's been studies done that show children who've never met their parents, who were put for adoption from birth, they use the same phrases. They talk just like their parents did. They have the same mannerisms even, or even as their grandparents. So epigenetics is a real thing. But then that begs the question, does that mean, well, I'm predisposed to have cancer, or heart disease, or obesity, or whatever it might be, diabetes. Is that a factor there?
Genetics do play a factor in that it predisposes us, but it's not a destiny. We are not destined to potentially develop diabetes unless we bring about the conditions that it's true we may have a propensity to maybe increase weight gain when we're older. And yes, 90% of type 2 diabetics are overweight. But guess what? There are lifestyle choices that we can make that can negate those genetic propensities. In most cases, and certain types of cancers, it's very difficult to determine, if a child is developing cancer, is there anything we can do at that early stage? But I believe any disease can respond to a healthy lifestyle. I think in all cases, healthy lifestyle should be a foundational element of healthcare. And indeed, we mentioned this another earlier time, that in the U.S. especially, we suffer from a lack of prevention and wellness education. And that is to our great fault, because we are basically an epicenter of chronic disease, which is strange because we spend the most per capita on healthcare.
That seems like the biggest pandemic we have.
Exactly.
is,
That's right.
Uninformed people are misinformed
Yes.
about what is health and what does a healthy lifestyle look like. Because
exactly.
most diseases, or the big diseases, the big killers, are mainly classified as lifestyle diseases.
Exactly. That's right. And those lifestyle diseases, we learned from the COVID pandemic that they also predispose us to viral pandemics, or these outbreaks, or whatever they may be, these highly pathogenic bacteria, fungi, amoebas, whatever it may be, that are ravaging the pestilences that walk around, and we're told in the Bible. But Christ wants to keep us safe. And whether it's safety from the chronic disease or whether it's safety from the pestilence, these same healthy habits are preventative. And this is what's so important, because and this is what drove me to just go out for 8 years of our life. My family, we put everything in storage. We said, let's go. Lord, please lead us. And we went from place to place, almost every weekend, a new place to do health evangelism. And we shared the same concept, the same things we're talking about right now. And they're very simple too. Our people perish for lack of knowledge. We know that, but it's simple things. It's for the lack of the simple things that people are perishing, like drinking enough water. In our Children's Health Summit, we
Yeah.
talked about the fact that just drinking 5 8-ounce glasses of water reduced the risk of a fatal heart attack when we look at both men and women by about 50%.
That's incredible,
You know?
because that's at the minimum end of what you should even
Exactly.
be
That's
partaking
right.
in.
For adults. Yes. And imagine if every American knew and was given some kind of support, because it's not enough just to have knowledge. You also need to have encouragement so that you can really get behind that healthy decision. But imagine if every American had that. Heart disease would no longer be an epidemic. It would no longer be the #1 killer. And that is just drinking water. How simple can it get? And there are other things that compound that risk reduction, like a healthy diet, exercise, and so on.
So then, with it being simple, or supposed to be simple, how does that play into the individual being a medical missionary? Should everybody be a medical missionary, or is that something that is, specific to a certain set group of people?
It's a very good question. Not everyone needs to go through a formal education in some type of health field, obviously. Because honestly, when I went through nursing school, I learned little about simple health methodologies. We learned the highly advanced things because medicine, in a sense, is geared towards keeping very sick people alive. That's where it's geared toward. That's where all of our resources are put. And unfortunately, in that paradigm, we don't have the time. One of my greatest regrets in working in clinical nursing was I didn't have time to spend with my patients to tell them, hey, this simple thing you can do right here to reduce your risk of coming back. We had people come back and forth and back and forth. We called them frequent flyers. And nurses would joke about it, but it was very hard for me to sit through those kind of reports because I realized it's so simple for so-and-so. If we just took the time to educate them and encourage them, they wouldn't be coming back. We could say, bye, we love you, we hope you never come back, but if you do, we're here for you. But it was this frequent flyer situation that was occurring that, that characterizes our healthcare system, unfortunately.
So that, I guess, leads into a conversation that me and you were having earlier, which is medical missionaries and the medical missionary work is something that we should have been promoting a lot more over the last 100 years.
Yes.
Something that we've really lost. If we look back at books like Back to Eden by Jethro Kloss, that's one of my favorite health books. That's written, I guess it'd be around 100 years ago now.
Yes.
And the science in there and just the recommendations, the amount of information and knowledge that they had then is tremendous. And somehow we went away from that. And like you said, the system isn't training people on prevention, it's on keeping sick people alive, which isn't really what I think anybody wants.
Yes.
We want to be healthy as long as we're alive, not live long and sick.
Exactly.
So how do you think that could have maybe changed over the years or went away from, why did we leave that?
That's a very good question, and I'm not going to conjecture on that. I can actually cite some pretty good resources. Famous book by a professor out of UCLA, Berkeley, called Rockefeller Medicine Men. And this professor was invited to tour all the files of the Rockefeller Foundation, I believe it was, to see all the interchanges and the developments in the development of American medicine in terms of its education, because what changed was the education. And that was a stated goal of the American Medical Association at that time and the Rockefeller Foundation for the Advancement of Medicine or Medical Education. Carnegie also was involved. And so there were a lot of forces at play that really propelled a certain paradigm of medicine over others. And this gentleman that wrote the book that I referenced, he went through systematically and analyzed this and said it's because of the changes that were made that there does not seem to be any way out. And the only thing we can do is he turned to this was back during the Soviet era. He said we need to socialize medicine to the extent that the Soviets had, because of the bureaucracy and the corporate fascism and all the different aspects of medical care that had come under the auspices of government oversight even, that really probably should have been left to the free market. Because medicine was actually doing quite well in the early 1900s. We had the Seventh-day Adventists who were creating these huge sanitariums. Amazing, amazing. People of all type, rich and poor and famous. They were all flocking to these places, and they were receiving great benefits. Exactly. John Harvey Kellogg was notably the best surgeon of the day during that time. We had a group of physicians called the Eclectics, which had a very, very good handle on how to determine what methodologies to use, what treatments to use. Their motto was, let's use what doesn't hurt the patient, but helps them. Okay? So if it seemed to help, but it hurt, then they wouldn't use it. And that was a very, very, very much improved system of medicine that unfortunately was passed by the wayside when there was this restructuring of medical education. And if you look at the purposes, the stated purposes of those who were involved, like after the Flexner Report was published in 1910 by Abraham Flexner and was promoted by various entities, the stated goal was to make medicine very exclusive and to get rid of people who wanted to do it for just the benefit of humanity. They wanted to draw people by improving physician status and pay. It's in the Flexner Report. They wanted to get rid of minority schools, women's schools. They didn't want women doctors anymore, which women had made a lot of advancement in medicine. And also we had plenty of African American schools during this time. And so we were really set back in medicine. People don't realize that, but we were when we just bought hook, line, and sinker this new paradigm. And they started with education. That's why I believe it's so important to reform the mold of education so that, our physicians, our nurses, our lay people, everyone is learning about the simple ways of health. Because as I've said before, it's for the lack of the simple things that we perish. It's not so, I don't need to know how to do a cardiac bypass surgery to tell someone to drink 5 glasses of water, 8-ounce cups, to reduce the risk of needing that cardiac bypass surgery by 50%. These simple things. And if we can do this in the Spirit of Christ, that's the essential thing. Because we want people to be made whole. And we know that a lot of these unhealthy lifestyle factors are habit, or maybe even addiction. And the only way to break free from addiction, as we discussed actually in the Children's Health Summit, is to approach an individual in love. It's the only way.
So pushing them away isn't the right thing to do.
Exactly. That's right.
So how big of an effect does, because you mentioned about, telling someone they could drink 5 glasses of water, or maybe not telling someone else, maybe just hearing ourselves that we should drink 5 glasses of water. But that's hard to believe that these simple things are going to do that. Why do people have such a hard time believing that these things will work? And how can people get over that?
I think it's by taking steps. Sometimes it's hard to just jump headstrong into a full lifestyle, paradigm change. But my motto is, okay, I usually don't start talking about diet. Diet is a very difficult subject for some people to consider, dietary changes. I like to start talking about water. It's simple. And hey, taste and see the Lord is good, Take a sample here. Here is his healthy lifestyle that he wants you to enjoy. Why don't you have this water, this 5? Just start with 5. We say 5 to stay alive, 8 to feel great, 12 to rejuvenate. That's for adults. Children need a little bit less, of course, depending on their age. But it's these simple things. If we can get them started in making simple decisions, they will feel better. And they will say, what's next?
Little wins.
What's next? What's next? We shouldn't expect, some people are ready for a complete 180-degree turn, but most people are not. But if we can just get them to start turning around, we've won half the battle. A new start, I like to use this phrase, start new. But whatever it is, we need to incorporate these healthy behaviors incrementally if needed. But once we start, we're going to feel so much better.
So pick a couple things or even one thing and just start doing that.
Exactly.
And seeing how it changes.
That's right.
That brings us to the story, and you did a whole lecture in the Children's Summit about Daniel and his 3 friends.
Yes.
So they took that and they said, try us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're saying the same thing to all of our viewers is if you learn a little thing, try it.
Exactly.
Don't try it for one time. 5 glasses today, I don't feel that great tomorrow.
Exactly.
But try it for a few days or a couple weeks.
Yes.
Until it becomes a habit, and then they will be able to see that effect.
Exactly. Perseverance is the key. And one thing that we brought out in the children's program it's a biblical concept, is healthy behaviors. Every good and every perfect gift is from above. It cometh down from the Father of lights, in whom there is no variableness or shadow of turning. God is going to give us good things, and He's going to help us. We can't do it on our own, As a late teenager, I struggled with smoking. Believe it or not, Here I am lecturing about health today. Praise the Lord for that. Struggled with alcohol and dabbled in drug use. And my father was genetically I was predisposed to be an alcoholic and so on. But I realized after a very short number of years that living only for myself and living for pleasure was destroying the peace that I was longing for. It was an illusion. It was like that oasis in the desert, the mirage. Once I got there, I realized, wow, there's nothing here. And finally, I realized I need to turn back to the God of my fathers. My parents tried to bring me up as a Christian, and when I just got to the point where I just surrendered, I said, Lord, here's my life. Live it for me. I'm tired of living it for myself. That's when I had peace. I was at the oasis, It was no longer a mirage. And the very first thing the Lord did for me was to not only give me that peace, but the next morning I woke up, I had a nicotine addiction and I needed to smoke, or I thought I needed to. And I prayed, I said, Lord, I've tried so many times on my own. I can't do it by myself. I need you to help me. I was desperate. But you know what? That's how we all are. We're in desperation. We cannot. How can a clean thing come out of an unclean thing? We may have a fleeting desire to do something healthy, but unless we ask God to give us the strength to do it, it's not going to work. And I stand here today saying I was able to overcome that habit. And every of those other habits that I had picked up in my youth, I was able to overcome them by God's strength. And I'm a living testimony of the power of God's grace, which anyone is who overcomes sin. But these healthy or unhealthy habits are a perfect example of what God wants to do to us wholly. Will that be made whole? It wasn't just, Ron, I'm going to get rid of your urge to smoke. No, it was, Ron, I'm going to get rid of your urge to smoke. I'm going to give you something better to do. I started exercising, and I started loving just going out in nature and reading my Bible. I never really read my Bible before that much. Never had an interest. Started loving the Word of God. And my whole paradigm changed. My life was changed from inside out, from top to bottom. There was nothing left that I said, Lord, no, I want to keep this one. I want to hold on to this one. In fact, a funny story, my cousin who was struggling with some of the same things, he said, Ron, I see you're a little depressed. This was before my conversion experience. And why don't you just give God one thing at a time? And I looked at him almost incredulously. I thought, why would I want to give him one thing? I'm tired of all this. I'm going to give him everything. And I praise the Lord that God placed that desire on my heart to be made whole. But this is what he wants to do for all of us. And we may not realize it. We might not have some of these glaring bad habits. But any unhealthy habit is a bad habit. And Christ wants to help us to overcome that. Any sin is a bad sin, whether it's a little lie, a white lie, or it's something we would consider a very, very much abomination in God's sight, it's still sin. And God wants to purge us from that because sin brings disharmony and discord into our minds, our bodies, and our characters. And He wants to make us whole.
So how could someone start, or what would you recommend? Because I'm sure you had a long journey to the point you are now. And you made a lot of mistakes and you learned a lot of things. And if someone's starting out, what would you suggest them to do to kind of get kickstarted? Maybe some resources, maybe something to read or look at or to look into or try themselves if they want to learn more about medical missionary work or health or just that some ways that they can be healthier.
Okay. First of all, I would encourage you to study Christ's example because it's very easy to get caught up in trends or philosophies, even in the natural wellness world, that are very much unbiblical, even in mainstream medicine, I would say. So study Christ's example, first of all. He is our pattern. Study how He healed people, the methodologies He used, and that desire to incorporate spiritual and mental health interventions as well, not just fixing the body, which is what people in medicine do. They do very well at times, and heavy trauma or some of this really severe chronic disease that manifests itself in organ failure. They know how to do that, but we need to take a step back and say, how do I cooperate with Christ in making that person whole? And so a lot of it has to do with friendship. Christ was a friend to everyone He came in contact with, even though His enemies. He truly fulfilled the admonition to love your enemies. We're told there were tears in His eyes when He uttered His scathing rebukes to the Pharisees. He loved them. He wanted to see them change. And He was so patient, but He's also so patient with us, Further resources, well, a good resource is the Children's Health Summit. And as I always say in our sessions in the Children's Health Summit, this is for children of all ages, from young to old.
And just for everybody to be aware, this is not released yet. This is not out.
Yes.
You have to go get an account for the Children's Health Summit, access to it, and then you'll also be given the opportunity to ask specific questions to different people who are partaking in the Health Summit. So that's a great resource there for everyone. So make sure you go to amazingdiscoveries.org and register for the Children's Health Summit. That's happening in July.
Yes.
Maybe we can, so other resources. So we have the Children's Health Summit. Maybe you could give a couple books that would be a good place to start.
A great book is called The Ministry of Healing. It's by Ellen G. White. Many notable healers and practitioners, even that are not of Christian faith, have read that book and said, this is the blueprint. This is the Jesus that I love. When we witness His healing acts and the way that He interacted with people, our hearts are just taken, So that's a great book. Of course, as I said, the Bible. There are many good resources, though. I like to study herbs and lifestyle medicine, and I don't know if I could name something off the top of my head. I'm sure Amazing Discoveries has some good resources available. Is it on your web store, potentially?
Amazing Discoveries has many books on health. You can go to our store there and see. One of my favorite is Back to Eden, and I mention that very often. I found it a very great resource because it has good nutritional information, but then it has a myriad of herbs in it and simple remedies that people can do. And some things that I've found that aren't even in some larger books are in Back to Eden, so I find that a very good resource.
Excellent.
And I have a correction. It is June 23 to 27 is the Children's Health Summit, not July.
Okay.
So I misspoke there. It's June 23 to 27, and you can go to childrensummit.amazingdiscoveries.org. childrensummit.amazingdiscoveries.org to register.
Mackenzie, you might also want to mention about the camp meeting.
Yes. camp meeting this fall. Ron's going to be joining us again at camp meeting. It's going to be a really amazing camp meeting, so you don't want to miss it. It's going to be happening August 12th to the 21st. August 12th to the 18th, not the 21st to the 18th. You can stay to the 21st if you'd like to help after. August 12th to the 18th. Don't miss that. That's on our events.amazingdiscoveries page, or campmeeting.amazingdiscoveries. You can go there and register for the camp meeting. For in person, I highly recommend that, because then you can talk to people like Ron, and you can be here in person, and it's a great blessing.
Yes, definitely.
So maybe we should start going to some of the questions that people have been sending in online.
Sure.
So we have some questions here. Let me just take a look. We have one question here. Are fermented foods good for you?
Okay.
Are fermented foods good for you?
Now, here's where I can point you to some resources. I've actually done a whole series called The Gut-Brain Connection and Beyond, in which I analyze all the different types of fermented foods and even the processes of fermentation. I wouldn't give a blanket statement that was something like, all fermented foods are good. No, they're not. Some of them are very unhealthy. Neither would I say there are no types of fermentations that are healthy. If we look at fermentation, just to give you a brief synopsis of this issue, there are certain forms of bacteria that I believe God designed to be able to survive the transit through the acidic environment in the stomach, also that can survive the sudden change in pH from the bile. That is usually what kills most bacteria. But there are some bacteria that can survive that. A lot of those bacteria are found on plants, believe it or not. Kind of like plant-based bacteria, that when we eat those plants, we get the bacteria as well. And plants are rich in the prebiotics that a lot of people will supplement. Well, you can get the bacteria, hopefully they're not irradiated, those plants, and you can get the prebiotics right there. It's a compound, not quite a fermented food at that point, but there is fermentation that takes place in the GI tract. Another instance, if you want to see the ideal food for babies, of course, we know that's mother's milk. God has placed, and we now know this because of medical science, God has placed a type of conveyance system, probably utilizing white blood cells, in which the mother's intestinal flora is sampled and taken up to the mammary glands, so that when the mother is nursing, the baby is getting not only the prebiotics in the different type of fiber in the breast milk, but also is getting probiotic bacteria from the mother's gut flora. So obviously, God intended for us to have this commensal bacteria living with us. We live in the era of, or maybe a little post-era of antibiotics. We are starting to see the detriment of overuse of antibiotics. But we used to think it was the miracle cure. And for the longest time, we thought there was no connection between gut health and the body, Some evolutionary scientists even believe we should cut it out like we cut out the appendix. Just some radical surgeons, even the early 1900s, said, let's just do total colectomies and take out the whole colon because it's useless. It's a vestige of evolution. And unfortunately, the people suffered tremendously when that operation was done. So my belief is that, yes, there are certain types of fermentation that are beneficial, but it's from those bacteria that are meant to be. Those types of bacteria do not produce alcohol, by the way. They don't create alcoholic fermentation. They create, usually it's lactic acid fermentation.
So could you give an example of some of the beneficial types of fermentation that people might eat or drink, and some of the detrimental ones, and why that's the case?
Definitely. Well, there is a fine line between the two, because any alcoholic fermenter that you have, or any bacteria that is going to break down protein. So let me just describe this. And I don't want to take it too much time, but I mean, I love to talk about this. It's a huge topic. But we have bacteria that are really the creme de la creme. They are they're termed homofermentive lactobacilli, okay? And they primarily produce lactic acid. They don't really produce anything else, and they are survivors, heavy survivors in acidic environments. Why? Because that's what they produce. They produce the byproduct of lactic acid. So those are the ones I believe are meant to be able to go into the gut and to colonize there. They're very clean in what they produce. They're a term called sequential consumers. They will eat only the glucose or the carbohydrates that they can turn into lactic acid, and they won't eat anything else. Now, there are other varieties of lactobacilli, let's say, who will eat the sugars first, but then they'll eat other things after. So if you have very extended transit times in the gut, they can start eating, like, let's say, in the distal area or the end area of the colon. They can start breaking down protein and starting proteolytic fermentation or putrefaction, which is very toxic. And it also compounds the effect of constipation. So that's not healthy either. So it's not just eating the healthy bacteria, but also having the proper transit time. And the healthy factors that we talk about often are the key for doing that. Drinking plenty of water, staying hydrated, exercising, getting a good night's sleep. Some that we don't think about, but even the way that we look at life, are we constantly worried or anxious? That triggers a nervous response called the fight or flight response or the sympathetic nervous response. We actually talk about that in the Children's Summit in very easy terms. But all those things are going to inhibit the motility of the gastric contents and the intestinal contents. And what's that going to lead to? Even if we have the healthiest bacteria, some unhealthy reactions going on there.
So how does that affect like sauerkraut? What type of fermentation is that versus something like kombucha, which is super popular now?
Exactly. Let's start with sauerkraut. Sauerkraut starts out at a pH, I believe, of about 6. And it's been a while since I've given this lecture, so I may be a little rusty on the statistics. But it very quickly starts to go down in pH until the 2 or 3 bacteria that are predominant in that early culture die off because it's too acidic, and then you have the pure, the homofermentive lactobacilli, and they'll produce lots of lactic acid, and that preserves the cabbage. And it's also health promoting. But there can be a small quantity of alcohol in there and some undesirable byproducts from those alcoholic fermenters. So here's a simple step you can take to make a healthier sauerkraut, and that is simply to drop the pH yourself. Squeeze a lemon in there. I've talked to some Koreans and tried to encourage them to make a healthier kimchi, My favorite way of making a sauerkraut is just simply overnight cabbage salad. And what I do is I cut a cabbage in half, and then I'll quarter it, and I'll put it through a juicer, just half, because bacteria will grow much faster on the juice than they will on the cabbage. And then I'll chop up the rest of the cabbage, put it all into a jar, squeeze lemon juice in it, put some salt, shake it up, and I'll leave it in the refrigerator for one night. And guess what? It's delicious. It's the best sauerkraut I've ever had.
And those bacteria will still grow in the fridge.
And the bacteria will start to grow. The healthy bacteria, like Lactobacillus plantarum, will grow at lower temperatures. So there you have it. There's a simple way to make something that maybe is not the most healthy, but it is one of the best choices in fermented foods. But you can make it much better by eliminating the alcoholic fermentation. Now, kombucha is another story. I'm not sure if you can improve too much on that process, because what happens is they have a base of tea, which is caffeinated, okay? And they also take sugar and they brew an alcoholic mixture with a yeast, an active yeast that's very similar. It's almost genetically identical to the yeast that is used for winemaking or beer making. So, of course, it's going to produce alcohol and carbon dioxide. Now, what happens is they let that ferment to such an extent that a conversion takes place in the alcohol in its acetic acid conversion, acetic acid fermentation. The problem with that is, yes, there's vinegar in there, and there's alcohol, but there's also intermediary substances. The most dangerous is something called acetic aldehyde, which is like formaldehyde. It's actually addictive. Studies have found that cigarette companies will put that in the cigarettes. And other studies show that mice that feed off of water and nicotine, they didn't develop strong addictions until they put this benzaldehyde compound in with the nicotine. So you combine ethanol alcohol, caffeine, benzaldehyde, acetic acid. Okay, that is an addictive substance that probably tastes pretty gross, but it keeps you coming back because it forms an addiction. And honestly, I would not want yeast to colonize my intestinal tract. Why? Because they're going to be increasing permeability or the potential for leaky gut. They're producing ethanol, which breaks down proteins. They're producing tons of carbon dioxide, which I mentioned to you earlier today is one of the triggering agents for Candida albicans to turn into a commensal fungus or fungi, one-celled fungus, into its pathogenic mushroom type phase. It's the carbon dioxide buildup that does that. So some of these things are marketed as good for you fermented foods are absolutely not. And they may be making a killing off of them, but they're also harming people.
And that addictive nature and chemicals in there is why people keep going for it, because the people I know who really like it, I got to drink this every day. It makes me feel really good.
Yeah.
Because we have those chemicals that are triggering those addictive senses in our brain.
Exactly. Now, I must say this, the FDA did crack down on the alcohol content of a lot of kombuchas. And so they went through steps to reduce that. But there's still the caffeine, there's still the acetic aldehyde, and there's still the acetic acid. So those are all potentially, when you put them all together, they're potentially addictive as well, even if you drop the content of alcohol.
And one thing I wanted to touch on too that you mentioned is the prebiotics on the plants. And this is why at Amazing Discoveries we really promote people growing their own food.
Yes.
Because that's going to really benefit those prebiotics, the organisms on the plants you're eating. And that's why you pull a carrot from the ground and you eat it. You're getting all that good bacteria from the soil, and that's going into your digestive tract and going to help you digest these things. But if you're getting GMO food or chemical, sprayed with all sorts of herbicides or fungicides or whatever it might be, is killing all that organism.
Exactly.
And then you're getting a sterile, denutrified product, and you're not going to be healthy.
That's right.
Because I've seen many plant-based or vegan that don't look that healthy. And a lot of the reason is because the foods they're eating is denutrified. And that's a huge benefit to growing your own food, is your gut health.
That's right. Exactly. Besides the physical activity, being out in the sunshine and the fresh air, and the object lessons. The object lessons even, So.
Okay, and like I mentioned, if anybody has questions, please put them in the comments and we will get to them. We have another question here. I'm looking for healthy replacements for many foods such as frozen juice, milk, butter and margarine, mayonnaise, eggs, meats, etc. They're looking for healthy replacements for these.
Okay, well, that's quite a list. As Mackenzie mentioned, if you want healthier fruit, then can you grow your own? Find local orchards. I've had some of the best tasting and I know most nutritious fruits from local orchards, if you can find one. Especially if they're not spraying their fruit. What a wonderful thing to have local. But I think we need to definitely search for better alternatives for some of these things, but some things just don't have very good alternatives anyway. It's like taking a step, a little baby step in the right direction, but potentially it's still not very healthy. So if something is very high in fat, like a cheese and that kind of thing, then maybe try hummus on your sandwich instead, I know there are vegan cheeses and that kind of thing, but read the ingredients labels too, because some things they put in there are natural flavors and so on. We don't even know what they are, Could be anything natural. So I really like to find out what is in my food, but reading the labels is important, and trying to eat more whole foods also is very good for the health. So some of these things that we eat that are refined foods, if we can just take a step back and get the whole food version of that could be helpful as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The more towards the original that food was like, the more you can see what was growing,
exactly,
the better.
That's
if
right.
it looks nothing like what it grew, it's not going to be as
Yes.
good. If it looks more like what it grew like, then you're definitely on the right track there, especially if you can grow it.
Yes.
Because then you're getting really good nutrition, especially if you're looking after your soil and you're not getting all the sprays. And that's a big contributor to a lot of gut issues is the glyphosate and the sprays, which is glyphosate is another word for Roundup. That's one of the main ingredients in Roundup, which is why we have a lot of wheat intolerance and things of that nature. And then they were asking about milk, butter, margarine, mayonnaise, eggs, meats. And for that, there is some plant-based versions of that. Not all of them are amazingly healthy.
Yes.
You can start making your own, and there's going to be more and more good recipes. We're actually going to be hopefully doing some of these recipes here at Amazing Discoveries soon. We're very close to finishing our studio kitchen, so you'll be getting a lot of these good recipes. But like Ron was saying, if you're trying to replace things like milk, just go with a plant-based milk, whether that's a soy milk or an almond milk, coconut milk, depending on if you have sensitivities to almonds or others. And butters and margarines, you can use a cold-pressed oil also is an option if you want to use something like that. And then meats, I would go to beans and tofu and things like that.
See, meat is not an essential component of the diet, regardless of what the U.S. Cattlemen's Association would have you to believe, because there are plenty of other sources of protein. And in fact, it turns out we don't need as much protein as some would have us believe. Protein is a nutrient that the body should be recycling. It's kind of like this, you set out your recycling in some various locales, and you throw away some trash, right? Glucose gets discarded. I mean, we use it, right? But protein gets recycled. The amino acids get broken down. We do lose some protein through the gut. We lose some of the lining of the gut, some of the mucus. We lose some protein through that. But by and large, protein can be recycled, and our bodies can be very efficient in that process. So we don't need as much protein as some industries would have us believe. But there are great sources of protein in the plant kingdom. Don't think that you have to have meat to supply those needs.
Better than meat even.
Exactly.
Even higher concentrations of protein. And then it's an easier digestible protein too.
Yes.
It's not causing the acidosis because of the animal proteins. One thing in the book Back to Eden, he talks about protein levels, and sometimes some of the recommended daily amounts would be like 1 gram per pound of body weight, something like this, up to even 2 grams, I've heard, which can cause an acid overload because of an excess amount of protein. Your body can't deal with that very easily, which will cause you to acidify. That's not as big of an issue with plant-based because they're not eating. Most people aren't eating a protein as their entire dish, like you would if you were on a carnivore diet or something like that. A good rule of thumb, Jethro Kloss talks about this, is around 0.36 grams per pound of body weight. 0.36. So for 150 pound or 200 pound person, that's going to be under 100 grams, under
definitely.
that.
Yes.
So you do need to be mindful about all nutrition because you might be eating certain things because you like that thing and you're not really being conscious about what you're eating because you just don't know better. Maybe you're not getting your omega-3s or omega-6s, and these are things to be conscious about.
Yes.
But you don't need exorbitant amounts if you're being mindful, like you said.
Exactly. That's right.
We have another question here. What kind of probiotics should we be eating, if any?
Okay. We kind of touched on that. I haven't given any specific organisms, but I will tell you that the plant-based bacteria is going to be the ideal. And don't think that you have to go out and spend a lot of money on probiotics that are designed with these special enteric coatings that will survive the stomach acid and the bile secretion and finally make their way down into the gut. To me, those things were never intended to be there. If they can't get down there naturally, why would you want to put them down there? There are plenty of other options. I really enjoy Lactobacillus plantarum. It is what's termed a heterofermented or facultative homofermentive bacteria, meaning that it can break down other food products, but it will start with a sugar first. It creates a lot of lactic acid. It also, I believe the compound is called alpha-galactose, if I remember correctly. And this is what got me started investigating probiotics in the first place, was I found that this particular organism produced a sugar that's not normally created in the body, not normally found in the body. And so if you start to have elevated amounts, the immune system says, hey, this doesn't belong here. Let's produce some antibodies and we'll get rid of it. We'll target it for destruction. Well, it just turns out that that compound, as I said, I think it's alpha-galactose, is found on the glycoprotein structure of a lot of pathogenic viruses. So whether it's the elephant or the tail, if you target every tail and suddenly an elephant comes in, you're getting the elephant too. And that's a term called natural immunity. When the immune system targets a structure or a molecule, and yet that molecule is a part of a larger pathogen, the pathogen is going to get targeted too. So that is an added benefit of some of those healthy bacteria. A lot of people like acidophilus, it's a very good pure lactic acid producing bacteria. And there are a lot. I would encourage you can go on YouTube and watch my series. My whole series is there, free to watch. It's called The Gut-Brain Connection and Beyond. And maybe that's something even Amazing Discoveries can show as well. But we go through and we break down a whole list of different bacteria and options for you as well. I don't want to take all the time just to focus on that, but there are quite a few. But it is important for us to be informed consumers of these things.
Okay. So we have another question here. Are mushrooms okay to eat?
Okay. Now, I'm not just going to give my opinion, because a lot of people have opinions on this one, right? But I will say this. If you believe that mushrooms are across the board, now we're not talking about poisonous mushrooms or hallucinogenic mushrooms, of course. Those are not a part of the Christian dietary, right? But if we're looking at mushrooms that are considered edible, like the portobello and so on and so forth, if we try to answer that question, prefacing it with this, if you believe that mushrooms are bad, then also you probably should stay away from yeast as well. And so yeast-raised breads and that kind of thing. And some people do have convictions, and I'm not going to condemn them for that. Whereas some people say, well, mushrooms, I don't see any specific prohibition as to why we should not eat edible mushrooms. So I'm not going to give you a yes or no. But what I am going to say is maybe that becomes a liberty of conscience issue, where if you don't want to eat mushrooms, it's not an essential component of the diet. I will say that. You can survive without mushrooms, but you may like to eat them. You may choose to eat them, the edible type. And I'm not going to condemn anyone for doing that. I don't see any huge health risk in doing that, I should say.
Some of the studies that I've read actually have suggested that they can give benefit to certain functions, especially they can be a good source of protein. They can help with certain brain function. Obviously, we're not talking, like you said, about the hallucinogenic
Yes,
ones,
of course.
which people could count that as brain function.
Yes.
But that's not what we're referencing.
That'd be brain malfunction.
Malfunction.
Yes.
But yes, there's nothing. It's not an animal. It is a plant, and we don't have any direct correlation to that causing disease or actually harm in the body. We have another question here. How about matcha? Is matcha okay to drink?
I remember looking into that years ago. I believe matcha is very high in caffeine. And for that reason, I avoid it. I avoid anything with caffeine. A lot of people have heart palpitations and PVCs, which are a type of heartbeat irregularity, from taking caffeine. What a lot of people don't realize is that headaches, especially migraine headaches, are often triggered by caffeine usage. And guess what? The remedy is oftentimes in migraine medication, another dose of caffeine. So you're basically promising yourself another migraine. You say, migraine, go away, come again another day, and it will come again another day with caffeine as a therapy. But there are so many other options for some, and matcha is probably high in antioxidants. A lot of these teas are very high in antioxidants, but you can find uncaffeinated varieties of leaves that are also good for tea. Like raspberry leaf tea, high in antioxidants. It's uncaffeinated. Ginger root tea, turmeric root tea, and you can flavor these things. If maybe you don't like the flavor of turmeric, you can put some things in it that make it taste a little bit better. But there are always other options, and I like to go with whatever is healthiest, whatever is best. But matcha would be, to me, it's kind of like green tea, There are some health benefits, but there's also the caffeine. And caffeine has a direct effect on sleep. We learned in the Children's Health Summit that even 2 cups of coffee in the morning can inhibit a very essential component of sleep, the slow wave sleep or the delta sleep at night, which long term can lead into a whole host of chronic disease. So these things act insidiously. We don't realize right away that they're causing harm, but we could wake up one day with the symptoms of some chronic disease and realize that, hey, I've got diabetes, hey, I've got this or that, but it was a slow process, and it takes place with the slow, day in, day out decisions that we make.
Just like you're mentioning, some people say the same about wine. It has these good phytochemicals inside. But does that outweigh the negative aspect that you're going to be getting from that?
Yes.
So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, and then you're getting an extra compound that's going to be injuring something.
Exactly. That's right. And the concept of temperance, which we talk about in the Children's Health Summit, is that, and this is a very biblical concept. We break it down and go through all the scriptures to show this. But those that were noble characters in the Bible, Christ, a perfect example, the prophecy in Isaiah where we would call his name Emmanuel, and he would learn to choose the good and refuse the evil. That's temperance. We should refuse the evil, even if it has good mixed in. Poison is still poison, even if you dilute it. It's diluted poison at that point. And that makes it more dangerous because we think, oh, it might be okay then, Satan oftentimes presents things to us as a mixture of good and bad. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil had desirable qualities. It wasn't just some ugly, stinky fruit, that we wanted to stay away from. But it was alluring in some aspects, and it seemed like it was good for food to Eve. So the question of temperance was there from the very beginning. Are we going to make compromises and say, well, it has some good qualities. I know it may have some bad, but I'm still going to take it. That's really a violation of that principle of temperance. And Christ will give us the strength. Temperance is, don't worry, you feel like, oh, I can't stop doing it. You can't on yourself. You can't by your own strength. But we can do all things through Christ, which strengthens us. And he sends us his Spirit. When we come to him, we ask him for help. He sends us not only the spirit of love and long-suffering and patience and brotherly kindness and tenderness, but he sends us a spirit of temperance as well. And that is a gift of God just as much as love is. We can't produce love. We also can't produce temperance. But when we come to Christ, he gives it to us as a gift.
We just got a question that kind of goes along with what you were just talking about. What are some ways to get off of caffeine or any addiction?
Okay. Some addictions require a tapering off so that you avoid the physiologic side effects. Caffeine would probably be one of those. I know a protocol that a gentleman tried once was to brew a very strong pot of coffee, almost disgusting, just plain. And by the way, caffeine is not necessarily psychologically addictive unless it's paired with a pleasurable stimuli. Okay? Numerous studies have shown this. It is physiologically addictive. We'll have physical side effects when we take it away. But if you isolate caffeine from any positive stimuli, it becomes less desirable. You will still have the physiologic side effects. Some people like the taste of strong coffee, so that would not be for you. But to be able to find something that you absolutely hate that has caffeine in it and taper off of that would be the best way to quit. Don't try to find something, I really love this triple latte espresso or whatever, and I'm just going to take little sips. That's an addiction, not simply to caffeine, it's an addiction to that product. Because believe it or not, caffeine takes the brakes off the pleasure response in the brain, the nucleus accumbens. The adenosine receptor, the adenosine molecule there is kind of a braking force in the secretion of dopamine. And when those brakes are taken off by caffeine blockade, then we become addicted to whatever caused that burst of dopamine, that burst of pleasure. So it's no wonder that Starbucks is on every street corner, because they have studied the human brain. There must have been psychologists behind Starbucks, because you have conditioned place preference, which is a hallmark of psychological addiction at every Starbucks. You have people that go there and you see them with their laptops and they're studying. They just want to go there and be there in that little restaurant. And yeah, the ambiance is nice. That's all part of the addiction. They just have such a burst of dopamine. They get set in this conditioned place preference, and that is a type of addiction. So avoid those places also if you're trying to get off of caffeine, because they're going to bring back some of those psychological desires. You may have gotten over the physiologic desires. You may have gotten over the headaches and the shakiness and jitteriness and that kind of thing. But avoid those places, and especially if you can tell, hey, this is making me want to have one of those things I used to love. And I use that term loosely, love. It's lust. Our soul lusts after those things. Love comes from God and it's pure.
If I could add something to that, a good replacement that we found is something called ticino. And it's chicory, roasted chicory. You can get it with dandelion, with turmeric, like you were mentioning, and it is quite nice. Another thing that I've known that people use and recommended people do is when you have this buildup and you have these hormones and things, doing a Russian steam. So something to sweat it out.
Yes.
And so some of those addictions, especially people who have, hard drug addictions, Russian steam is a good way to sweat out some of those chemicals, sweat out these things, and that'll really help the cravings go down.
Yes.
So that's going to be a big part, because ticino or something else or a roasted dandelion isn't going to give you that same, it's not going to take the buzz
Exactly.
that you need. But doing something like a Russian steam or hydrotherapy is going to help to cleanse out some of those things.
That's very beneficial for smokers also.
Yes.
Smoking is one of those things you don't want to taper off of. You want to quit cold turkey. It's much easier to quit cold turkey than to taper off. Studies have found that when we taper down and we don't get as much nicotine as we used to, our serotonin levels drop and we become depressed. So it's very difficult. When I stopped smoking, it was just, it was a struggle. It was, to that point, it was the hardest physical thing I'd ever done. And my heart goes out to anyone who's addicted to tobacco, because I know it feels like you're in a cage and you can't get out. But Christ can help you, and He helped me. He helped me get off of cigarettes, and since then I've since researched and written articles on this phenomenon. But some addictions, and it would behoove you to study a little bit about the addiction. Alcoholism, you sometimes have to be hospitalized to be tapered off of, alcohol addiction, because the body becomes dependent upon it. But there are other things that you can quit cold turkey. Tobacco is one of those. It really works best. And avoid areas where you're going to be around secondhand smoke. Now I can't stand secondhand smoke. I just do not want to smell even a small particle of it. And before, I'd be breathing it down my own nostrils. So Christ, when He comes into your heart, He helps you to hate those things that you once did that you realized were such a detriment and such an addiction, such a bond, And if you don't have hatred to that, we need to pray and ask Him, Lord, please give me a hatred for evil, not for, evil people. The person we should still love, but these evil things in life that come into and disrupt our peace, and put us in bondage. Once Christ has freed us, we should hate. We should ask Christ, give us a hatred of that compound, of that addictive substance, and help us to warn others about it. It's terrible that we have industries that are devoted to addicting people in these ways. As Christians, we should be foremost in saying, don't go there, don't go there, don't buy that, don't do that, because it's only going to harm you. And we should say that in love, of course.
So for anybody who's just joined the stream or recently joined the stream, I'm talking to Ron Meinhardt. He's an RN. He's been here filming for our Children's Health Summit that's coming in June 23 to 27. So you can go to childrensummit.amazingdiscoveries.org and register there for the Health Summit. And make sure you're putting your questions below, and hopefully we get to them before we end this stream. So please be chatting your questions there, and we'll try to answer all the questions that we possibly can. I want to also announce that we are starting a new Bible answer Q&A. So right now we're doing a health Q&A with Ron. We're going to be doing a Bible series of Q&A. So make sure you're sending your questions in for that. And then we are talking a little bit about growing your own food. If you want to know how to grow your own food, we have our How to Country YouTube channel. How to Country YouTube channel. And let's go to some more questions. We have another question here. Trying to cut back on cheese. Is switching to goat cheese an okay place to start?
Okay, that's a good question. There are some compounds in dairy that are potentially harmful that have kind of developed recently over the past 100 years. And I can see why people would want to leave dairy-based cheese. But I'm not so sure that goat cheese is a good replacement.
One moment, guys.
Oh, we have a technical issue here. I think potentially Ron's mic has died. So give us 1 moment. We can grab the handheld wireless mic. Just give us. Okay, so while we're waiting for a microphone, I can add to what Ron was mentioning. When we're talking about dairy, there's several compounds that when we're younger, when we're a baby and we're having mother's milk, that we can digest. So we have beta-galactosidase, that's an enzyme to help us break down lactose and casein. And these compounds is what becomes difficult as you get older. So we're just getting hearing that, okay. Thank you very much. And these compounds, your body stops producing those enzymes as you get older. As you're above 2 or 3 years old, your body actually completely stops making these enzymes, whether you continue with milk or not. And then even if it's your mother's milk, you stop being able to fully digest it. Goat's milk can be a percentage easier to digest because the lactose and the casein levels are different than in cow's milk. Because a cow, the ratios are designed for a cow, and if anybody has cows, you'll see they go from this to this extremely quickly, much more than a human does. So their levels are way outside of what we can naturally absorb. This goes back to the protein assimilation recommendations of 1 gram or 2 grams. A baby is getting 0.75 grams per pound of body weight, and they're literally doubling in size like every several weeks or months. And we're not doing that as an adult. So we don't need anywhere near 0.75 grams. So that should be telling for that. Ron, could you just repeat kind of where you started? Because I don't think anybody heard what you were mentioning there.
Well, I'm not an expert on goat's milk. It sounds like you have quite a bit more knowledge in that area than I do, but I have heard say that goat's milk is more digestible than cow's milk. I tend to stay away from them, not because there is something inherently wrong with it per se, but because of all the disease in animals these days, you know.
That's a very good point.
The disease in fish, you know, some people make the argument, well, Christ ate fish, you know, why shouldn't we eat of those things freely? All the mercury and the PCBs. I grew up with a fishing pole in my hand, and if I didn't have one, if I was anywhere by a body of water, well, I found a bobber floating somewhere that someone had inadvertently hung up their line on, and hey, I knew what else was there. There was a hook and there was a line, so I'd build my own fishing pole, and I would be fishing. Even if it was a little mud puddle, I would see if there's fish in there. I had older fishermen that would come out of their cabins and remark, I've never seen a young man like you before. You know, you're so determined to catch something. Whatever I would catch, I would eat. Until one day, I started doing some research. This is actually for my community health nursing class. And I was researching the waterways in a certain city that was actually very close to where I lived. And I come to find out there were all these restrictions on, oh, you don't eat this many fish, you can't eat any of these fish if you're pregnant, and these forever chemicals that are there in the water. It's because factories dump their chemicals or whatever. Sewage is dumped in these waterways. I would not eat fish anymore, you know, because the environment in which they live is so polluted. And fish and animals in general, and even us, we go through this process of something called biomagnification. So even if there's small amounts of a certain toxin in the water, because we're constantly eating that toxin and we're surrounded by that toxin, we tend to accumulate more, maybe in the liver or maybe, you know, in the concept of eating fish oil. That's why I stay away from that as well, because it could still be contaminated with a lot of these toxins. But yeah, it used to be a viable food source.
On biomagnification, just before we leave that, that's a really important concept, and probably many people haven't heard of that. Biomagnification can happen, so you have, for instance, plankton that are in the ocean, these little organisms, even plants. So you have mercury in the water or any other kind of heavy metals. And that plant will have a certain amount. And if you eat that plant, you're getting very little. But then let's say a slightly larger organism, maybe it's a shrimp, is eating that plant. And he's gaining those compounds. And then something else eats him. Well, every time you go up the layer of the food chain, the compounds extrapolate.
Yes.
So the toxicity grows by multiples every single time you do that. And so even then something that you might think is healthier, like a salmon or whatever, has the most extrapolated volume of these heavy metals.
Yes.
And a really good resource book that I read years ago is, I believe it's called Eating Alive, Eating Alive 2. And it talks about heavy metals and mercury and some of these things. But going back to, I guess, just to finish answering the question, is goat milk a good replacement? I guess in a very short-term transitional period, you could do that. I'm very much a proponent of going straight for what you're going for, because sometimes delaying it too much can lessen your ability to make the switch, especially because it's a lot of times a mental thing. And the longer you do the right thing, your taste buds need to change.
Yes.
And that's a huge factor I'm sure you've seen with many people is when they switch over their diet, they taste different as they're eating foods. Oh, I don't like that. And then 3 weeks later, 21 days later, oh, this is really good.
That's right.
You didn't think that was good 3 weeks ago.
Exactly. This brings to mind a study that was done a number of years ago. The scientists hypothesized that a plant-based diet would make people so depressed and reduce their quality of life so much that it would negate all the positive health benefits that are being purported these days. And so they built something called the Quality of Life Questionnaire. And they had one group that were plant-based and another group that were eating just, whatever they were eating before. And it turns out that as the time progressed, maybe it took a little bit of a hit at first, the quality of life index for those who had just made the switch, but over time, the level of the perceived quality of life increased tremendously for those on the plant-based diet. And it's like, Jesus says, or through the scriptures, taste and see that the Lord is good. Give it a try. The Daniel challenge was a 10-day challenge.
Yeah.
And there were positive effects that were apparent after only 10 days. It took 3 years to manifest the whole, mental acuity and all of that. But a lot of these changes can happen very quickly. And it's not just what we eat. It's exercise, drinking water, sunlight exposure, all the simple things.
So we have another question here. I have osteoarthritis, so I believe is correct. No meat or dairy is helping me? ?
Okay, osteoarthritis. Why are the bones becoming, especially the joints, becoming inflamed? It could be because of overwork. It could be because of too much weight. A lot of times people will develop osteoarthritis just because of all that extra weight bearing on their joints. In fact, a good orthopedic surgeon will recommend weight loss before surgery because sometimes that takes care of the problem. There are compounds as we put on too much weight that can cause that issue of osteoarthritis as well, not just that extra weight bearing on our frame. So in terms of what can be done, meat is a potent source of a compound known as arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is the inflammatory compound that starts a cascade that eventually ends in systemic inflammation. Prostaglandin synthesis is what it's called. Now, I wouldn't encourage the partaking of meat, in general. But in this case especially, and not only that, but also high amounts of omega-6. Omega-6 is a reservoir that feeds into the body's production of inflammation as well. So a lower amount of intake of omega-6 is an anti-inflammatory diet, cutting back on the dietary sources of arachidonic acid, which would be the meat products. Anything with a cell membrane in it, that's where the arachidonic acid comes from. So avoidance of those things and increasing the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compounds that are very widely found in a plant-based diet. There's some really great herbal remedies such as turmeric, ginger. Yeah. These things have been, and omega-3s, been found to either block the production of inflammatory compounds or even, like in the case of omega-3, convert what would normally be an inflammatory compound, an inflammatory prostaglandin, into an anti-inflammatory prostaglandin. So, and they work so much better in terms of long-term efficiency and less side effects than, let's say, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. Because oftentimes what these do is they'll shut down one pathway of inflammation, but they'll leave the other gate open. And what happens? Well, maybe you shut down prostaglandin synthesis. You don't have the achy knees, but you have inflammation in the lungs because of something called leukotriene synthesis. So God's anti-inflammatories tend to act on the whole body and stop the paradigm of inflammation. But we also need to cooperate with those things. It's not just like taking a pill for all of our ills. We need to cut off the inflammation at the source as well. This is a multifactorial approach to decreasing inflammation. Could be weight loss, exercise. Moderate exercise is good for the joints if you can actually walk, if the pain is not just keeping you from doing that. But then also targeting the diet to increase the anti-inflammatory capacity of our food intake is also essential.
Yeah, very, very good. And I did want to mention, and I'm glad you did at the end, that moderate exercise. People with arthritis, osteoporosis, rheumatism often benefit from some sort of exercise. It doesn't have to be heavy weight.
Yes.
Especially if the person is heavier set. But if you're having someone that's not overweight or not obese, then exercise is going to help, because the way the body works with bones and muscles is when we use it, it tears the muscle fibers, it puts these micro cracks in the bone structure, which then get healed over and builds it. So actually, exercise helps with arthritis and rheumatism and removes inflammation from those areas, especially if you're not moving. Small movements or hydrotherapy on those localities will increase blood flow, and then movement will allow the blood to bring the nutrition there to rebuild those parts of the body that are being affected. And then, like you said, because the person was asking about meat, the way the body uses acid and alkaline foods is actually in a reverse. So if you have an alkaline food, which all meat products are alkaline, the body will create an acid, or it'll become acidic because of that. And when your body's acidic, then it needs a neutralizer to neutralize the acidity. And so then it takes calcium, which is the greatest base of all, from your bones. So then it pulls the calcium from your bones to neutralize the acid. And that's why even people who are drinking a lot of milk and they're thinking, why am I getting, arthritis and osteoporosis? You're getting all this extra protein that is meat-based, which is high acid forming, and then you're using up all the calcium in the milk and then some from your bones to actually promote osteoporosis instead of the reverse of that. So we have another question here. Just going through the questions coming in here. What is your take on using herbal tinctures made with alcohol for preservation and extractions of medical constituents, but taken with hot tea to evaporate the alcohol off?
That's a very good question.
Very good question.
And I can see that you're already starting, you want to avoid the use of alcohol, and that's commendable, because alcohol or ethanol is a volatile compound. The only issue is that since there's water there, it will still be in solution to some extent. My favorite types of tinctures, and we've made tinctures, I would say amateur clinical herbalist. We make our own herbal tinctures all the time. And I have, not really made alcoholic tinctures. I've just kind of avoided them. I have taken alcoholic tinctures. And I've known people that were former alcoholics. Once they tried the tincture, they're saying, I can't do this, This is going to bring me back to the bottle, because it is alcohol. It's vodka, It's something that we should be avoiding. And I've had other people that say, I had to go to the liquor store to make a healthful product. That just doesn't seem right. Alcohol does dissolve nutrients, and you can bring them into solution in ethanol. But keep this in mind. Ethanol also denatures proteins and enzymes. So I believe the very best types of tinctures are glycerin-based and water-based.
Yeah.
And when you combine the two, I think you get an even more effective tincture than an alcoholic tincture.
Without the side effects.
Exactly, that's right. And glycerin is naturally sweet. Children like to take it. It doesn't taste yucky, like the alcoholic tincture. And I'm glad children think alcoholic tinctures taste yucky. I hope they consider that yucky tasting the rest of their lives. I don't want to get them started thinking, hey, alcohol is good as a medicine, But I understand that, it does dissolve and bring into solution certain things. It has a long shelf life. There are some desirable qualities with alcoholic tinctures, but I believe you can make a superior tincture with glycerin and water. There are two parts. I call it the max extract method. I've actually copyrighted that, but not officially. You can use it, don't worry. Anyone can use that. And what we do
Just
is...
say from Ron Meinhardt.
Exactly. What we do is we boil a strong tea with those herbs, and then we take that tea and the roughage from the herbs, and then we put that in glycerin, and we tincture it for a month or whatever, shaking it every day. And that forms a very, very potent tincture. So there you have it. You have an alternative.
And this would be a great thing to do maybe some classes on, and we'll be doing in the future.
Exactly.
I think this is an amazing thing to teach people how to do as tinctures.
Exactly. And if you make your own tinctures, it's exorbitant the amount of money that these companies charge for tinctures.
Very expensive.
You can make tinctures at home for about as much money oftentimes as you pay for maybe a 2 or 4 ounce bottle of the same tincture. You can make a whole half-gallon jar. So it's very cost effective, and especially the glycerin and water combination.
I think that's a perfect answer for the question. The only thing I'll add is another contraindication to the alcohol ones is when you're dealing with alcoholics.
Yes.
Which those who aren't can get away with it, but those who are alcoholics or have tendencies to that, then it can set them off. And that's not something you want to do when you're trying to promote health.
Exactly.
Okay, another question we have here. Advice on healing dental cavities with diet.
Okay. That's a very good question. What causes dental cavities is not the actual sugar or, the candy. It's the bacteria, in particular Streptococcus mutans or strep mutans. And if you are feeding them, they will come and dine. So if you have a candy lodged in your mouth or you're chewing on something that's just full of refined sugars, they're going to proliferate there. And the film that you get in your mouth after eating something sweet and not brushing your teeth right away, that's actually a biofilm that strep mutans forms. And if it's left there for long enough, it turns into tartar, and you actually have to have a dentist remove it. So what can be done to remove that biofilm and to kill strep mutans? There's a very, very common food item that has been found to kill strep mutans and to dissolve biofilm. The strep mutans, which is plaque. And it seems counterintuitive to take turmeric to whiten your teeth. You would think, it's going to stain my teeth, it's going to make them yellow. Guess what it stains? It only stains the biofilm and degrades it. It kills the strep mutans. I have a lot of Indian friends, East Indian friends. They have the whitest teeth. You know why? They're always eating turmeric. And I've told them this, look at the research here. The turmeric in your food is helping to whiten your teeth. It destroys the bacteria that promote dental caries. So yes, I'll just be a little transparent here. I've had a cavity for the past 11 years, and guess what? It hasn't grown and it doesn't hurt. It's not an issue for me because I avoid sugar. I'll have sugar in food, especially high fiber food, But sugary candy, sugary candy, that is a recipe for cavities. Yeah. And unless you cut out the sugary candies, you're going to have cavities, even if you eat the healthiest diet, because you're feeding the bacteria there that are going to produce the acid that degrades the dental enamel and bores into the tooth. Great.
Another thing I would add to that is coconut oil pulling. Pulling is something that's been done. Actually, it was started in Russia. If people didn't know that, with sunflower oil. Cold pressed sunflower oil was the first time that was done. And then over time switched to coconut oil. But coconut oil pulling, which is a lot more nicer than sunflower oil pulling, can heal cavities completely. So I've known of people that have used this. You'd take a couple tablespoons at a time, put in your mouth, and you'll pull that, swishing it basically through the teeth for 10, 15 minutes. Some people can go half an hour if you're really strong, but most people don't last that long. As much as you can do it, and then over the course of a couple weeks, then they see that benefit. Actually, you're talking about plaque. When I was growing up, before my diet change, I had horrible plaque. It was, I would have to go to the dentist and they would be grinding away for hours to get everything off. And then when I made the switch, then I didn't have that issue anymore. So that goes to show that diet is a big part of that.
Oh, yes.
And the bacteria growth.
That's right. And high fiber foods are also essential too, because our teeth are bones. And for bones to be strong, they need to have a weight-bearing aspect to them. So there needs to be some compression involved against them. And when we eat very soft foods or mush, liquid foods, we don't get that same dental benefit that we would from a high-fiber food that we have to chew thoroughly. That is a great benefit for dental health as well. So that's another aspect of the diet that's important to avoid cavities.
Great. What do you two guys eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner on an average day?
Well, that's a good question. Should I go ahead first?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I have very peculiar dietary likes. Honestly, if I could only live off of fruit and grains, I would. But thankfully, my wife does encourage me to eat other things. Fruit and grains for me, they're very digestible. I actually have some GI issues, some inflammatory GI issues that I keep in check by eating a lot of fruit, actually. I found the very best thing to be, if I can find an orchard with prune plums, very healing for the gut. It's amazing. It's like it puts me into remission for maybe a year or two. It's just absolutely, if I eat enough, a good quantity of them for a long duration. But I would say I try to be open-minded and eat a variety, different colors. The different colors of the fruit and vegetables indicate different vitamin and mineral compositions. So I wouldn't say that there's a set protocol that I follow with diet, because it is important to have variety, but to eat things that are going to give you a complete package of the complex carbohydrates, the proteins that you need, the antioxidants that you need. Every meal, though, without exception, I try to eat something fresh. And I do that up front because studies have found there's a phenomenon that occurs after we eat. It's called post-meal hypertension. And basically, it's just all that inflammatory reaction from the food, the immune system kicking in also. And you have high blood pressure because the nitric, or the compound that keeps the blood vessels open is degraded by oxidants or oxidization. So a good preventative for that, and this is coming from the research, is to have a high level of antioxidants up front.
Yeah.
So if you're going to eat blueberries, well, have your blueberries first, and then consume the rest of your meal. Why? Because you're priming your body to resist oxidation, and that will keep your blood pressure low and help in other areas where oxidation could cause potential damage. So that is one protocol, I would say, without exception, whether it be eating fruit or vegetables, even a salad, try to do that up front because you prime the body with those antioxidants. I think that's kind of all I have to say. Mackenzie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I probably do have a pretty regimented, at least in my mind. Now, we're both humans. And we do our best. Life happens sometimes, and you don't always do exactly what you would like to do every single day. But for myself, since I was majoring mainly in nutrition, that was like a big interest for myself, because it had such a big impact on me personally. I'm very aware of my daily requirements and take note of that. So something I recommend everybody get, and we don't get any benefit from this, I wish we did, but there's an app called Chronometer, and I use that. I don't need to use it as much, but for new people, I would recommend you get the app Chronometer and you start using it. It has all foods, all brands, and you can put in there your body weight. Now, its recommended daily amounts are probably not going to be accurate for what you want to be partaking in, but if you put in, let's say, you can adjust the minimum requirements, change protein levels to 0.36 grams per pound of body weight. Then you'll see how much vitamin E am I eating, vitamin A, the different B vitamins, your omegas, your fatty acids, all of your amino acids, and which ones, is it lysine, is it, the different ones, and what are you getting, and where is it getting from? And you can put that, oh, I'm missing this, I'm missing that. Oh, maybe that's why I'm feeling this way, or I'm not, and then you can start adjusting. And you can just look up what foods are high in, phosphates, phosphorus or niacin or something like this, right? And you start eating that, and then you put the amounts in, and it's a very helpful tool for people starting to learn their nutrition and how they should be eating. So that I recommend for everybody.
Yes.
I love tofu. So I eat tofu at least once a day, maybe twice a day. It's a good source of protein. The phytoestrogens are great, even for men. That's a whole nother topic that we could go into. The phytoestrogens in soybeans are not the same structural molecule as estrogens, so they're not going to make you feminine.
Yes.
And or else all Asian men would be effeminate.
Yes.
But I would say that, like you said, you have to get your raw, because that's your enzymes, that's your living, your bacteria that really help with your digestive process. And then you're going to add in your macronutrients, things like your carbohydrates, your fats, your proteins, on top of that.
Yes.
So
exactly.
That wasn't specific foods, but
yes,
we like to grow a lot of our own food. At Amazing Discoveries, we have the Amazing Discoveries Farm. So we have the market garden here, and if anybody is a farmer or wants to help on the farm or learn or apprentice, we're opening for apprenticeships here right now, so come join us on the farm. So we grow a lot of our food. We today ate carrots still that are from the root cellar and beets that we grew here. So anything you can grow, highly recommended. Okay. Are there other sources of, and we're going to have to start answering these questions quicker because we're getting a lot, and we've been going on this stream for quite some time already. So we will start wrapping it up. We'll see if we can get through these quickly. Are there other sources of vitamin B complex apart from animal-based foods? That's a great question.
Well, definitely. Grains are high in niacin. Bananas are high in B6. Sunflower seeds are high in B6. Some of these things are superior sources of B vitamins. So I would say, the information is readily available if you decide to go online and just ask, and maybe the Chronometer, is that what it's called?
Yep.
The app could also help with this search, but to seek out foods that are high in certain B vitamins. But yeah, there are some very, very powerful, potent sources of vitamins. Now, one I will say, and this is often asked about plant-based diets, what about B12? The landmark study that was done on plant-based diets and B12 deficiency revealed that it was actually on the Hallelujah Acres diet. And a lot of people don't realize, but that is a raw diet, but they do juice fasting. Juice fasting and also like the barley greens mixed. That does not, juicing and barley greens mix is not going to have the same amount of probiotic content or bacteria content as, let's say, a Whole Foods. And also the fiber is deficient as well. Those bacteria that colonize our gut are dependent upon that fiber for food. They're going to die off if they get down there into especially the tail end of the small intestine and the large intestine without that fiber to eat. And bacteria are the ones that produce B12. Any organism that got B12 got it from bacteria. So don't let anyone tell you that meat is a great source of B12, because meat is a great source of bacteria. That's why you got the B12 from them. And those bacteria that are in the meat are often not desirable to have going down into the intestine. Why? Because they're proteolytic fermenters. They putrefy that meat. And if left out of the refrigerator, you will see that happen. That bacteria will go to work on it through enzymatic processes. Now, that being said, how do we get B12 as individuals consuming a plant-based diet? Yeah, that study did show a deficiency. I believe it was like 40% of the people there were deficient in B12. But guess what? About 50 to 60% of Americans in general, regardless of diet type, are deficient in B12. So that was just a small drop. I don't know if it was even that statistically significant. But even of meat eaters. So a big part of it is making sure that we are having the healthy bacteria with our food, which means eating garden foods, I know of a doctor who would place patients that were low on B12 on local, especially out of their own garden foods. And guess what? By the end of their session with that patient, it would be about 2.5 weeks, their B12 levels were elevated. And then the only thing they did was include more of those foods. So I believe it is possible. I don't believe that we have to be dependent upon animal products for B12, because those animals also got it from the bacteria, And so if we can have this symbiotic relationship with commensal bacteria, with beneficial bacterial flora in our food, then we're going to get potentially B12 absorption from that because they produce it. Now, there are some sources of B12 you can take. I'm not against supplementation of B12. I think it's necessary in some cases. And it's very easy to obtain. If you check and find that your B12 levels are low, then you could consider that. Supplementation of B12 is still much less expensive than a meat-based diet, even if you did decide to go that route. But I wouldn't be surprised if a person could elevate their levels of B12 and keep an eye on them, but through eating more raw whole foods out of the garden.
100%. Actually, through personal experience, I say plant-based now instead of vegan because I'm not religiously vegan. But plant-based for 19 years, strictly. And I not so distantly got blood work done to check everything, and was very curious on my B12 levels, and I'm above average. And I take no supplementation. So this goes to show that you don't need to be eating meat that has B12 in order to create B12. Just like you said, it's a bacteria created. And I just want to maybe poke at a topic. We don't have time to cover it, but that's essential and non-essential nutrients. Because some of these are essential, which means you have to eat it, and others are non-essential, which means your body can create it. And that's probably a great thing for people to look into on their own, is the difference between those two. B12 is a non-essential nutrient to be intaked if you're functioning properly. And if your B12 is low, then that should be a warning sign that you're not doing something right. Or that you need to fix something. The cause list doesn't come. And yes, certain people have maybe injury to their intestinal tract and they have problem digesting or have other issues. But everyone can be helped slowly over time, at least to regain a little bit.
That's right.
So we should be trying our best to do that. And one other thing, like you mentioned about the juicing or the blending, when you do that, you're still getting the minerals, that doesn't change, but the bacteria die because they can't take that spinning action or the crushing motion. So they are killed in that process. And you can see that under a microscope. When I was taking microscopy for soil microbiology, we were looking at studies of how to add bacteria to the soil so that the plants are healthier because they digest through bacteria just like we do. They don't just suck up nutrients out of the ground. Bacteria actually help the plant to do that.
Yes.
And if you just sprayed the bacteria out too small of a nozzle, it will kill it on the way out, and then you don't have any bacteria anymore. So that's another thing to consider as well. Do you see, let me see here. Going to just move here so I can read this better. I might have passed it here. Okay, in South America, people drink and chew cacao leaves or cocoa leaves as medicinal plant. What do you think about that?
The cacao being the predecessor of chocolate, I'm assuming. There are a lot of antioxidants in the cacao plant. You know, the leaves are full of antioxidants and chlorophyll, but it also contains a number of toxic compounds like caffeine and the other methylxanthines like theobromine, which are basically natural insecticides. And they also have an ill effect on human health as well. So yes, there are some benefits, but that goes back to that concept of, do we want to have something that has benefits but also has, detrimental properties, or do you want to go to that everything is good plant, And I choose to go to those everything is good plants because, what use is it sometimes to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or maybe even 2 steps back, We may help one organ and injure the other. So we need to look at health in a holistic paradigm and say, I want to do things that are good for the whole body, not just necessarily, take care of my headache and then injure my liver, like taking Tylenol will do.
I think that's a perfect answer. And that's getting back to caffeine and these nerve stimulants, right? Which is the same as chocolate. It's a nerve stimulant, which isn't something we want to be playing with. How do you cure Candida?
That's a good question. Well, this information is not meant to diagnose or cure any disease and has not been approved by the FDA. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about the physiology of Candida. You see, Candida, a lot of us have in our digestive tract, and it doesn't cause any problems. Candida is a polymorphic yeast, meaning it can go from a one-celled organism to basically a mold type fungus. When it's in its one-celled state, it's not dangerous. It's a commensal organism. It doesn't really cause a lot of problems. But when it transforms over into its mold state, that's when it starts digging into the epithelium and it actually produces anti-inflammatory compounds that ward off the immune response, but it causes tissue destruction. And it turns into all types of really strange shapes and figures, but it's a dangerous organism to have in its pathogenic phase. Studies have found that the switch, kind of, if you would look for one, that turns the non-pathogen or non-disease-causing single-celled Candida albicans into the mold state has actually elevated levels of CO2. So how do we get large levels of CO2 in our digestive tract? That's by having the non-pure, homofermenting bacteria. We could have some heterofermenting bacteria, heterofermenting lactobacilli, like the kind we use to raise sourdough bread. And I'm not, saying that using those things to leaven bread is a bad thing, because we kill them when we cook, right, that bread. But when we have those, we can even, some supplement manufacturers will put these types of organisms in their supplements. And I look at the packages and I say, how can they put this? This is going to hurt people. I don't know how they make these decisions sometimes. It's not based on science. It's based on, that fermented food over there has this bacteria in it, so it must be good, we'll put it in our supplement. It's not based on anything else. That's the logic they use a lot of times. So it would behoove us to find out what the byproducts are that are being produced by these bacteria. Now, I will say this. Having a yeast, non-Candida yeast, grow in the intestines could potentially increase CO2 levels. Sodas, stress. There could be a lot of things that could influence CO2 production. But I would say the biggest is probably those heterofermenting bacteria, the wrong kind of bacteria colonizing the gut. They're going to produce CO2. And eating large amounts of sugar could also increase the production of CO2, because we have more of this fermentation taking place, and especially the free sugars, the sugars devoid of fiber. So all those things combined are kind of the triggers whereby Candida can transform into this more dangerous form. Another thing is the use of antibiotics. When it wipes out a lot of the healthy forms of bacteria, it's been found that Candida can come in after that. And it could be the die-off from those bacteria. They're not really sure. Maybe the CO2 that was produced during that time, but the Candida start proliferating, and then you have a Candida infection as well. So what can be done? Well, this is, as I said, this is not an approved necessarily remedy. But if I were going to take care of my own Candida, what I would do is I start with the simplest methods. I would start with eating more probably vegetables, get that roughage to help clean out the intestines. And I would take activated charcoal, because what activated charcoal does is it adsorbs gases, and CO2 is a gas. So you can basically capture that gas in the activated charcoal, and the digestive tract can get rid of it. Now, if you're taking activated charcoal, of course, got to drink plenty of water so you don't become constipated. But activated charcoal is a wonderful detoxifier for the whole digestive tract. It's something that we should probably consider taking every now and then, at least, maybe even on a regular basis.
Just as a preventative.
Exactly. That's right. It's very good for upset stomachs. You'll find that the poison control centers often recommend that you have some activated charcoal in the house, because it can adsorb with certain toxins. So it's a wonderful supplement. It's kind of one of those, go-to remedies that I like to always have around.
Definitely for medical missionary work, have activated charcoal.
Yes.
Whether it's tablets, the capsules, the powder, or all of the above, to make it easy for whatever you're trying to use.
Yes.
And one more thing about the charcoal that you were mentioning there, and it spurred a thought. Now I don't remember what it was.
Well, charcoal also lower cholesterol levels. There was a study done that was published in The Lancet in the 80s that showed that charcoal in 1 month, these gentlemen took basically divided doses, 3 tablespoons a day. That's a lot of charcoal, but probably 1 tablespoon with each meal. Didn't develop any nutrient deficiencies, but guess what? Their LDL cholesterol decreased by over 40% in 1 month, and their HDL increased. There was no statin at that time that could do that. And statins come with a whole host of side effects, we know. So they're not really that desirable for people if they can avoid it, to avoid its usage. But activated charcoal, it's detoxifying as its side effect. So
and that just what you mentioned was actually what I was going to mention about nutrients. It doesn't absorb nutrients. And we're saying adsorb because it's not absorb, it's adsorb.
Exactly.
That's how charcoal functions. It adds into the molecule structure. but it's not going to rob you of your nutrients. So you can take it with a meal, you can take it at any time, and it's not going to cause you a problem there.
Yeah, long-term studies on animals have shown that.
Okay. Actually, one more thing on that Candida question. If you're having a big problem with that, antibacterial foods like garlic would be great. Things like garlic.
And garlic is antifungal as well.
Antifungal.
That's right.
And then you could go on a diet, Candida diet, where you're lowering all sugars, including even fruit sugars, just for a period of time. Not that fruit sugars are bad or compared to any other refined sugar, but just for that period of time to give your body that step up, and then you can start introducing again. Can be helpful. Do you have any remedies? We're just taking the last couple questions we have here. We apologize for those who are still sending in questions. These have been great questions.
They have been.
But hopefully we'll be able to do this again, and we'll get to your questions. We're going to finish up with the last couple here. Do you have any remedies for alopecia, either COVID-induced or other?
That's a good question. Well, let's talk about male pattern baldness for a second. A lot of people don't know the underlying physiologic reasons why they're losing their hair. It has a lot to do with testosterone, and a particular variation of testosterone, which is known as DHT, or dihydroxytestosterone, which is also found in high prevalence in the prostate. So a male pattern baldness is also a indication that there could be increased risk for prostate cancer as well. So it would behoove us to try to take some steps to take care of that or remediate that excess in DHT. There are a lot of natural remedies that have been shown to block the conversion of testosterone to dihydroxytestosterone. Some of them are like spearmint leaves, it's like spearmint tea. Pumpkin seeds, also very, very powerful. The beta-cytosterol, the plant sterol in the pumpkin seeds, has been named as the compound that could be helpful with that. But I am sorry to say we have not found an exact cure for it. But that does not mean we're giving up, right?
As soon as I find out, I'll let everyone know.
Yes. But some of these foods would definitely be worth a try. And also just improving health in general, because, hormone levels can be balanced by good sleep, positive mentality. Just being a parent has been shown to decrease levels of excess testosterone. And what does that mean? Well, just that loving, nurturing aspect of, relationships. And potentially that could be helpful. Health is so comprehensive. It's not just what we eat. It's not just what we apply to the skin. It's everything. It's our whole environment, our whole affect, our whole attitude. And all of it plays a role in recovery as well.
And when it comes to alopecia, this is a hormonal thing, right? Like you've been mentioning. So making sure that we're trying to get our hormones imbalanced as much as possible is the best thing that we can do for that. If you are having hormone imbalance or taking hormones, or some people who are taking birth control pills, that's messing with your hormones very strongly. These sort of things would be good to start looking at and getting under control. How do we balance our hormones correctly?
Exactly.
Okay, what is good for, this kind of goes along the same lines, what is good for menopause hormone imbalance?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on what is going on. Is it hot flashes? Is it lack of progesterone? There are some seemingly, I've never dealt with it myself.
Me
but
neither.
I have talked with some ladies who have tried various remedies, and the things like wild yam or maybe some of the phytoestrogens could be helpful as well.
Yes.
To get and also exercise. Don't underestimate the power of exercise to balance hormones. One of the greatest influencers of progesterone levels is high intensity activity. So for women that are struggling, their estrogen levels are fluctuating, their progesterone levels are dropping. because of menopause. Well, exercise and more high-intensity activity like swimming. They put mice in these little swimming exercises and experiments, and they found that along with the lactic acid that was produced during anaerobic physical activity, they also had corresponding levels of progesterone increase. Theoretically, some of these lactic acid producing bacteria could also potentially increase progesterone. Or for males, the lactic acid in the swimming, for the male mice, it increased testosterone levels, the healthy form of testosterone. So don't underestimate the power of exercise, especially variations on that, because it's not simply moderate exercise for hormonal balance. It may be that you need to put a little bit more emphasis into higher intensity exercise.
Yeah.
But that's something worth looking more into. It's good to have a well-rounded, balanced exercise routine anyway, so it's going to be a benefit either way.
Yeah, and to go off of exercise, I think it's good for everyone of any age. Cardio and anaerobic exercise like weightlifting. They each have different functions, and they help your health tremendously in many ways.
Yes.
Specifically in your hormone balances. Now, with menopause or other things that can happen because of this, either you can have a decrease in estrogen levels where it drops a lot, or you can have estrogen dominance, which can be a big problem as well. And one thing that can help with that is phytoestrogens. So like from soy milk or tofu, what they do is they block the receptor against the real estrogen from getting to be too much buildup. And actually, one of the highest levels of phytoestrogen is in flaxseed. So that's a good thing. Proteins as well, getting enough protein, especially on a plant-based diet. Sometimes women will eat less protein than a man would. Maybe they like tofu or whatever it might be, and they're wanting more different things. Traditionally speaking, anyways. And proteins is the building blocks of hormones. So sometimes when you're going through these phases where you're losing a lot of protein because of huge changes in your body, then a little bit more can be helpful in helping to balance those hormones properly. Some herbs that can be taken is wild yam. Wild yam cream, that can be a good source. Another one is black cohosh. That's an herb that can be taken that is really good for that as well. And then just all the 8 laws of health. If you're doing that, you're going to really help your hormone balance. Sunshine, proper rest can't be understated.
Yes.
Or overstated, I should say.
Exactly.
All the 8 laws of health.
Exactly.
We have one last question. What is the best step to switch to a plant-based diet? I quit coffee, but struggle with meat. Everyone eats it around me.
Okay, well, the best first step is the one you've already taken because you have indicated a desire to change. And that is a step that a lot of people never are able to make. So the next thing, we need to realize that in and of ourselves, we're powerless to make positive change. When it all comes down to it. But in Christ, we can do all things. We're told we can do all things through Christ, which strengthens us. And if we know that something is good for us, and yet we feel that we're powerless to do it, all we have to do is ask God, and it may be we have to plead with Him continually. Give us the victory over this, and He will do it. He will make a way for you to avoid even, if those temptations are too much, being around your friends who are eating meat. He may give you a new set of friends. For me, when I was around I had a wonderful group of friends, I thought, but they were smoking and drinking and doing drugs and that kind of thing. And God had to give me a new set of friends. I realized that I just could not be around them. Now, meat eating is a little bit different, of course, but nonetheless, it may be that you need at least a little support group to go to every now and then. Make friends with some plant-based vegetarians and ask them for advice on, how recipe advice and how they go about fixing their food and that kind of thing to make it palatable. But also reach out to your friends, because for such a time as this, God has placed you in a position where you can be a help to them, because you were just like them. And that's probably one of the reasons why they became friends with you, because you had so much in common. But now they're seeing a change, and they want to know, is this real? Is it really positive? Is it really beneficial? And if you continue to be that loving and lovable Christian, along with making these positive changes, it's almost like you became a soldier in the behind the front lines of the enemy. No other evangelist could be there in that circle of friends, but God placed you there for such a time as this. And the plant-based diet is a good entering wedge for other reforms too. Because if you're open to that, if your friends are open to that, they may be open to doing other things that are health promoting. They may be open, I'm not sure if your friends are Christian, but they may be open to determining the reasons why you're doing these things, and I'm sure that you have at least some scriptural basis for doing what you're doing as well. So I'd say you're already on the right track. Persevere, go forward. If you're having trouble with meal selection, find some people that are doing it. Amazing Discoveries, I'm sure you all have some resources available as well. But don't give up. You're doing the right thing. You're going in the right direction. And I like to say that good health is a journey. And a lot of times we may have to take baby steps. We might take giant leaps, but keep going in that direction. We may even fall and stumble, but we're told that those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings as eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not faint. That became my favorite verse when I was going through this battle against addictions, because I knew God would give me strength. And yeah, those are pretty major addictions, but He can help us with any health improvement as well, and avoiding those things that we know are harmful to us.
Yeah, the righteous man falls 7 times. So just keep going. And, sometimes when there's something you need to do, just do it.
Yes.
Just take that first step. And I like what you said, surround yourself with people that can support you. We are the sum of the few people we surround ourselves with. So whether you do that virtually, maybe you can't physically always do that, but surround yourself with that idea of what they are standing for. And like what we're doing today, listening to this I hope it encourages everybody in what we've been talking about today and gives you strength to go forward.
Yes.
I've been plant-based for 19 years. You've been plant-based for how long?
I've lost count.
Lost count.
Yes.
And
the last thing I had was a buffalo burger, and it didn't sit well in my stomach because I had not eaten anything, meat-based in a long time. And I said, okay, no more. That was it for me. And that was at least 20 years ago. Okay.
So long time. We're both doing great. And it just takes sometimes a little bit of perseverance. And God wants that. He says that we'll have privations, we'll have struggles, we'll have things we need to fight for. But God doesn't put us through things that we can't handle. So whatever situation you're in, He's giving you the resources to do that. You just need to say, I need help.
Yes.
You just have to ask for that. And sometimes I do recommend people move themselves for a moment, even if it's a week, if it's 2 weeks, relocate. Let yourself time to get in this routine and to really understand it. Go to some people that you know are going to be supportive of this and who have done this and who can give you tips and help for this. And that can really help to bolster your understanding, your ability to face this. And then you can go back with renewed strength after that.
Exactly.
Great questions. We thank everybody for joining us and for sending in their questions. It was really, I hope, super beneficial. I had a very nice time with Ron here. And so a reminder, we have the Children's Health Summit, June 23 to 27. And go to childrensummit.amazingdiscoveries.org. We have camp meeting coming up August 12 to 18, campmeeting.amazingdiscoveries.org, our How to Country YouTube channel, where we teach you homesteading, country living, how to grow your own food, how much food you need if you want to be totally self-sufficient, all of these things. And watch out for our next Q&As. And if you don't want to miss them, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you go to adtv.watch and subscribe there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Ron. Maybe we can end with a prayer.
Sure.
And thank you, everybody, for participating. Let us end with a prayer. Ron, do you mind praying for us?
Yes. I would love to. Our Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the many blessings that you bestow upon us. You surround us with evidences of your love. And none the least of these are even health promoting and able to give us mental acuity and peace and satisfaction in life. And you also want to refine our character so that they represent the character of Christ. We pray that you would make us whole, because this is what this life is all about, that you would cleanse us from all unrighteousness, that you would give us your grace, because it is your grace, it is your merit that reigns supreme in our life. All our righteousness and attempts at right doing are as filthy rags. But we know that with you in us, when Christ is in us, the hope of glory, we can overcome any besetment. And so we pray ultimately that you would allow that still small voice to speak to us day by day, that you would give us the power of omnipotence to overcome temptation and to make positive choices and changes. And let us give you all the glory, Lord, because you alone are to be praised. We thank you and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again, Ron.
Yes, thank you, Mackenzie.
Happy Sabbath.
Happy
and